It's time for us to get underway this morning for our Bible class period. We're glad that you joined us for this. We know we have people in here and in the annex and watching online, and it's just people everywhere. And we're glad that you have joined us for this class. If you are a guest, I know we have at least one guest in this room, maybe some others watching online and elsewhere. As you see on the screens, we are involved in a study of the Christian and addictions and social media. This is the second week of the section on social media. We covered addictions for about 7 weeks. If you're watching this for the first time or a guest or something, all of our Bible class lessons from this room are archived on Facebook and YouTube. If you'd like to go back and watch that part of the study. We began last week thinking about social media, and we really, as we said, kind of at the beginning and end of our class last week, that the class last week was meant to be almost scattershot in a way. We kind of went here and there and all over the place. But it was really kind of meant to just lay down some basic thoughts, where we're going with several things, and kind of, this is going to sound really bad, lay about 5 foundations, which probably doesn't make for a real safe house to build on, but kind of just lay down several basic principles that we're going to kind of aim toward throughout the next few weeks. This class is scheduled to go this week and then through the 4 Sundays of February. So we have 5 more weeks, including today. But I had about 3 or 4 more slides from the end of last week's lesson that I wanted to get to. I really wanted to get to at the end of last week. We already ran over time, so I decided just to kind of use them as a way to bridge from last week to this week. One of the things I wanted to share with you is a quote, but it's something we said last week. I don't know how many times, 4, 5, 6 times, but we just didn't say it as a quotation from someone. This was written by Drew Kaiser. He actually wrote a book, by the way, I'm going to talk about in just a second, on this particular subject. And the quote that will come up in eventually when I get my remote control to work, or if they just change it for me, thank you, is technology is not the problem. He says we face a social problem. The technology is just the delivery system. I think that's a really good way of putting it. And that's one reason I wanted to teach this class. When the elders asked if I would, I was happy to, because I knew I'd be stepping over my own toes. But I was happy to do it because, as we said, some people think, I don't get on social media. I don't like that stuff. Some people, I don't even have a computer. But we're really not talking only about Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, all that stuff. We're really talking about interacting. And while we're specifically talking about social media as kind of the focal point, the problems that we face there are really a sign of bigger problems. We have trouble just relating to one another. And that can be true face-to-face, that can be true on the phone, it can be true through texting, it can be true through email, and it for sure can be true through social media. And so we're kind of using social media as the main focal point. But even if you have no interest whatsoever in social media, the principles that we're talking about are true basically across the board. And so I wanted to share that, and then I wanted to share 3 goals for the class. And we mentioned these last week, but I wanted to make sure we hit them here. Class goal number 1, if you can go ahead and change the slide. Thank you. I cannot multitask. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, and I can't do it. No. Class goal number 1 is to remind us of our need to be discerning in all of our communication, and that includes social media. We're obviously talking about social media specifically, but the fact of the matter is we need to be discerning in everything that we say and do. We're going to put a verse up on the screens in a few moments that kind of is the overriding principle. But really, in a lot of ways, this is the main goal of the class. Is if we're going to be involved in social media or really in any communication, we need to be careful what we take in. That's part of communication. And be careful what we say or type. That's part of communication. And I chose that word discerning very intentionally because I thought it was a specific and picturesque enough word to really say what we're trying to do. It's not just, be more thoughtful. Well, I can think some really bad things. But if I'm discerning, then I'm really stopping for a moment and letting those things go through my mind clearly that I take in and evaluate them. And then before I let things go out, I'm also evaluating that. I'm really thinking through, discerning those things. Goal number 2 is to show the dangers of social media, and not just on our physical and emotional lives. We're going to talk about some of that we did last week a little bit, but really more to our souls. That's obviously the number one focus for all of us, I hope, is we need to know that there are some dangers involved in social media in our physical well-being, our emotional well-being, and we can make that slash longer, relational, and all sorts of other things. But the ultimate thing we need to worry about is, does this affect our soul in a negative way, or can it affect our soul in a negative way? Well, of course, anything, if we're not careful, can affect our soul in a negative way, and this would certainly be one. And somebody says, great. So for the next 5 weeks, all we're going to hear is how horrible social media is. No, because class goal number 3 is to remind us that there are some good ways to use it. You've heard me say this in sermons before, probably. But I firmly believe that if all Christians would use social media for evangelistic and encouraging and edification purposes, that it's glorifying God. It's when we use it for other purposes, to rip each other apart and talk about how horrible everything is, and this party and that party, and this politician and that politician, and everybody stinks and the whole world's awful. Now please become a Christian. Really? That's not exactly the best way to win friends and influence people, right? It's not exactly the best way to win the world. But are there good ways to use it? Yes. There's a ton of them. And I hope as we go throughout the next few weeks, we notice those and don't just notice everything's horrible about it along those ways. The overriding principle, the overriding verse that I think we need to always have in mind is Colossians 4 and verse 6, where the Apostle Paul wrote, "Let your speech always," can I add, including when you type, be with grace, or be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. I think that verse, if we would have it sort of at the top of our screens or on the lock screen of our phones, it would change a whole lot of how we interact on social media. Let your speech always be gracious, or as I said, some translations have always be with grace, seasoned with salt. Paul did not write, let yourself always have salty language. He said, let your speech always be seasoned with salt. And there's a major difference in those two things. That needs to be the overriding principle whenever we are saying anything. That's why he used the word always in that verse. But it needs to be the truth, even when we're sitting behind a computer screen or on our phone or tablet, and we're typing out a text message or putting something on Facebook or putting something on Instagram or whatever. It needs to always be gracious. And there needs to be a seasoning, a pleasantness seasoned with salt that is true of our language. So I want to talk about today, that kind of bridges the gap from introducing the subject last week to where we're going this week. I've got two subjects we're going to try to get to today. If we only get through one of them, that's all right. But we want to talk about one of the dangers of social media this morning specifically. And it's something that a lot of people don't like to talk about it, so I'm putting it first to get it out of the way. No, I'm just kidding. I'm putting it first because in reality, it's one of those things we don't like to talk about. I think because we know it's true, but we don't really want to tackle it all that much. And that is the fact that it often leads to a lack of focus. I've got a quote, or part of a quote, a phrase really, from a psychologist. I don't know her, Sherry Turkle. I've seen her quoted several times in some resources that I've used getting ready for this class. So far as I know, she's not a Christian in any way, shape, or form. I believe she's just a psychologist. But she uses this phrase in writing about social media and just the internet age, really. Right? She writes about it more just in the digital age instead of just specifically social media. But her phrase is that we are always in a situation of continual partial attention. We've got 2 or 3, I believe, school teachers in here. And probably some others over there and watching online. They're probably going, that describes my classroom very perfectly. Probably every parent is going, uh-huh. But here's the thing. It's probably true of most of us. If we are fairly heavily involved in the digital world, not just social media, but things like text messaging and even having a smartphone right here in our pocket or right in our purse or whatever it happens to be, it is very difficult anymore for us at a great length of time to focus on one thing because our mind is thinking, when's that thing going to buzz again? When's the next notification going to come? Did somebody like my post? Is there another email? Who was that text from? I'm waiting for a phone call. And it's very difficult for us to actually sit down for a few moments or stand for a few moments and really concentrate for any length of time solely focused on that one thing at a deep level. You can find some different numbers on this. I didn't make a screen about this. But the number that I saw more than any other was that when we are trying to work on something and something distracts us and then we try to come back to what we were working on, they say it takes about 20 minutes to actually fully re-engage back in that original task. So maybe in my case I'm writing a sermon, maybe you're writing a lesson plan, or maybe you're just writing a card to someone and your phone buzzes or somebody knocks on the door, anything along those lines that just distracts you, and you sort of take care of that, or maybe you check your phone real quickly or something, and then you come back to studying or writing or whatever happens to be. It can take up to 20 minutes to fully be re-engaged back in that original task. Now, Ty, that's what we said as we opened our class last week. Every moment we're awake, we check these things every 4.3 minutes. So how often are we really, actually, totally focused on anything? And the answer is basically never. It's basically never that we're totally focused. William James once said, "When we reach the end of our days, our life experience will be equal to what we have paid attention to, whether by choice or whether by default." I really like that quote, and I really don't like that quote. I like it because it's thought-provoking. I don't like it because it hurts. I think he's exactly right. Whenever our time in this world is over, what we look at is our life experience is going to be, what did I pay attention to? In a lot of cases, that's going to be, I chose to pay attention to X, Y, and Z. But it's also going to be that I let myself get distracted by A, B, and C. And that's going to be the fullness of my life. Which one do I really want to look back on? So, why is it then that we have this lack of focus? Well, there's several things. Several things distract us. One thing that distracts us, one thing that often causes a fear of solitude, causes distraction, is a fear of solitude. And I don't know if you can see the screens really well. I tried to make the type a little bigger where you can see it, but if you can't, I'm going through these things with you. By fear of solitude, I don't mean that everybody in the world is scared of being by themselves, but in some ways we are. And some of that is because we have so interconnected ourselves with so many people that we feel responsible to stay connected. If I don't check in with my 2,227 Facebook friends today, they're going to wonder what happened to me. And if I don't put something on Twitter today for my 7,000 followers, they're going to think something went wrong. And if I don't put something on Instagram for my 3,000 followers there, and for sure if I don't get a few posts there, say, he doesn't like me, and it becomes a responsibility to check into all of these places in front of all of these people just constantly. And it leads us then to have this fear of actually being still, of having solitude in our lives. But you see on the screens, I hope, at least a couple of references among others we could mention probably, where we see even in the life of our Lord that He took time for solitude. He took time to get away. I've got two references if you can't see them. One is in Matthew 14, the other is in Luke 6. Just for time's sake, we'll read the one from Matthew. Matthew 14, verses 22 and 23. Immediately He, that is Jesus, made the disciples get into the boat and go before Him to the other side while He dismissed the crowds. And after He had dismissed the crowds, He went up on the mountain by Himself to pray. And verse 23 ends by saying, when evening came, He was there alone. You've heard people say many times before that if we were really to get a day-by-day look at the ministry of Jesus, it is remarkable what He did in one day. It's very rare that we get kind of a full day. I think it's once in Matthew and once in Luke, if I remember correctly. We kind of have a full day from morning to night. Here's what and it's like, okay, I'm tired reading it. But in both cases, at some point during the day of all this ministry and healing and teaching and dealing with false teachers and on it goes, he got away. If he could find time to do that in the middle of that life, then what's my excuse for not carving out some time to be alone? I wanted to read that passage from Matthew specifically because it tells us why he got away. It wasn't just, I just want to get away from people. That's part of it. But he wanted to be alone with his God, with his Father. Solitude is not just being alone. It's being alone with a purpose. And in reality, one of the things about solitude that I think when we don't have it, it leads to a problem. When we don't have solitude, I think we lack in awe of God. I've got a reference on the screens there to Psalm 8, a passage most of us know quite well, at least parts of it. But I want you to listen to these words. You can turn there and read them with me if you'd like. Psalm 8, verses 3 through 5. We really could read the whole psalm. It's only 9 verses. But just listen to verses 3 through 5 and listen to see if this sounds like someone who is distracted all the time. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him? And the Son of Man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings. You have crowned him with glory and honor. Now, does that sound like somebody who is just fretful and chained? It sounds like someone to me who was still for a while and actually looked around and thought about some things. This is one of the reasons why I like to encourage young people to go to church camp. If you ever go to church camp at all, one of the things they're going to talk about over and over and over during that week of church camp is it's great to get away from all the hustle and bustle and everything and actually be out in nature and see those things. We talked last night about going to camp, and I haven't been in a couple of years. I'm hoping to go this year and fry. But I remember very well growing up and enjoying that. But really, as an adult, other than taking care of the kids, it's kind of been better. And I mean that because life is so slammed that when you're out there and there is no cell service, and you kind of realize after a little while that your phone's not going to buzz because it can't. There's no tower out there. And you actually start looking up at the stars for a while, or the blazing hot sun during the day, or it rains and you see those clouds rolling in. You begin to have a wonder and an awe that's often missing. With all the distraction, all the just flow of information and constant movement and constant just everything. And I think sometimes we fear that, what if I just stop for a little while? And then we're reminded when we actually do of how awesome God actually is. How awesome His creation is and all of those sorts of things. It also needs to be said that by solitude, we don't mean loneliness. We don't mean just, sit around and feel sorry for yourself because you're lonely. There's a phrase in Mark chapter 3 and verse 14. Beginning of verse 13, Mark said, "And he went up on the mountain," speaking of Jesus, "and called to them those whom he desired, and they came to him, and he appointed 12, whom he also named apostles, so they might be with him, and he might send them out to preach." That's solitude with 13 people. He called them out to be with Him for a specific, holy, righteous purpose. So it's not just I have to be alone. It's I want to be alone or with a small group or whatever for a specific purpose of being in awe of God. But when there's this constant distraction, it's very difficult for us to do that. A couple of things solitude is not. By solitude, we do not mean we're rejecting the world. We're not talking about becoming hermits here. We're not talking about crawling into a cave and only coming out on triple coupon Thursday. It's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about being the kind of people who just tune out everything in the world all the time and are just basically hermits. So that's not it. Solitude is a specific period of time. Solitude is also not hiding from responsibility. I'll go into solitude so I don't have to. No, that's not it. We still have to do things. We still have to be faithful to God. We still have to be faithful to our families. So it's not just running away from responsibility. It's also not a problem to be solved. I have actually seen before people have put on social media that they're going to take a little break from social media, or even I'm going to step away from stuff for a week or so, take a little retreat or whatever, and people get on to them for doing it. What? this is not a problem to be solved. That's someone actually doing a good thing, if they're doing it for the right reason. It's not someone, it may seem weird to us, but maybe it shouldn't. What solitude is, instead, is allowing for time and space to dwell upon God. Psalm 46:10 does not say hurry and hustle and know that I'm God. It says be still and know that I am God. Now, let me say this. Can we know that God exists in the middle of hurry and hustle? Of course. God is all-powerful. We can know God, and we can trust God in the midst of our busiest days and the busiest seasons of life, of course. But I love that verse is almost right in the middle of the Bible. That if I really want to spend time getting to know God better, at some point, I'm going to be still. The phrase translated be still, and this is a loose translation, but it can also basically be translated let go. That's a very loose translation. That gets kind of at some of the meaning behind be still. Let go. And when we are still and sit or stand in awe of God and spend time thinking about Him and thinking about His people and His Word and spend time in prayer, I think the rest of that verse comes pretty naturally. And know that I am God. Know He is God. Because the other thing that comes true when it happens is I realize I'm not. And I think the other realization becomes I'm glad I'm not supposed to be because of all the things that are going on. So sometimes what distracts us is a fear of solitude, but it's so helpful if we actually can just shut things off for a little while. And for some people, seriously, it might be 5 minutes to start. That might be all we can deal with right now. And it's probably for a lot of us going to be really weird to just be still or with our Bible or whatever for even 5 or 10 minutes. But I think over time we begin to learn, the world's still going to spin even if I'm not checking in on it every 20 seconds. Things are still going to happen. They happened before I was ever born. And if the world stands, they're going to happen long after I die. So I can take a few moments to spend with God. Something else that distracts us that social media can play a part in is having a divided heart. This is the idea of multitasking. Our heart's always all over the place. Of course, in the Bible, when we think of the heart, we're thinking of the control center, our thinking, our will, our emotions, all those sorts of things. Proverbs 4 and verse 23, keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. I'm just going to tell you, I'm so proud of myself right now. For years, I could not say the word vigilance. It was always diligence. I'm just really proud of myself right now, David. I said the word right. But keep your heart with all vigilance. Why? If I may paraphrase, because everything you are comes from that. The springs of life flow from the heart. And the Bible talks to us a lot about making sure we keep our heart stayed or steady on one thing if at all possible. But our world says that's not good. Multitasking, that's it. I can multitask. Now, I'm going to get myself in trouble, I know. We're not talking about I have several things to do and I have to finish part of this project and then go over here and deal with a crying kid and motherhood or parenting or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. That's part of life where sometimes we cannot do one whole project in one sitting or take care of all of this particular chore, this particular task in one day. But by multitasking, what we're talking about is I sometimes think that I can work and do this other thing all at the same time. Or I can read my Bible and study my Bible, but be checking notifications on my phone all the time. And somehow I've got it all together where I can keep up with both of them. And the fact of the matter is we can't. We just can't. I want you to turn to Numbers chapter 14. It may seem like a very strange place to turn in something about multitasking. Numbers chapter 14, let's just start in verse 20. Verse 24 is going to be the key, but let's start in verse 20. Then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. But truly as I live, and as all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, none of the men who have seen my glory, and my signs that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and yet have put me to the test these 10 times, and have not obeyed my voice, shall see the land that I swore to give to their fathers. And none of those who despise me shall see it. Now here's the key verse, 24. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land into which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. Some translations have, he has wholly followed the Lord, or wholly followed me. And that phrase, by the way, is used of him again in Joshua chapter 14 twice. Joshua 14 verses 8 and 9, and Joshua chapter 14 and verse 14. What's my point? God saw something in Caleb that showed a complete dedication to one thing. He has wholly followed me. You don't see him going, isn't it great that Caleb could do 27 things at once? No, Caleb did one thing very well, and it was the most important thing. He wholly followed the Lord. Isn't that a beautiful description? I mean, wouldn't that be a great thing to be said of any of us? Not oh, he or she did this and this. They wholly followed the Lord. And that's enough. And God saw fit for that to be described in Scripture about Caleb on more than one occasion, that was his heart. Now contrast that with the wisest man who ever lived. In 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 4, we're told that Solomon had all these foreign wives and they pulled his heart away from the Lord. Okay, I know the Bible doesn't say this, but if Solomon was the wisest person who ever lived, you have got to think he probably was one of the greatest multitaskers who ever walked the face of the earth. If he could have all this information up here, keep doing all of these things, but he couldn't, at least at this point in his life, keep his focus on the most important thing. And he continually married all these foreign wives and all the, you know that well, and ended up pulling his heart, and I like the Bible actually specifically says that his heart was pulled or divided away from his God. A divided heart is dangerous. A couple of the gospel writers record for us the famous statement of Jesus that no one can serve two masters. You have it in Matthew chapter 6. The reference I've got on the screens is Luke chapter 16. Luke 16, beginning in verse 10, Jesus said, "One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" And then he said, "No servant can serve two masters. For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money." A lot of translations, of course, have the word mammon there. That's what he said also in Matthew chapter 6. I believe it's verse 24. That principle, and I know specifically there, because the verse ends that way, I know specifically he's talking about money, possessions, and those sorts of things. But the principle is true across the board. We cannot serve two masters. And the fact of the matter is, if we're trying to say, well, I'm wholly following God, but I'm going to allow myself to continually be pulled away every 4 minutes by the buzzing of a phone, am I really serving God completely? Does He really have my full attention? Or is my heart being divided by just the pull of the world and the pull of the latest and the pull of I've got to know right now everything that's going on in the whole world? One other thing that can distract us. Turn to the 101st Psalm, and that is worthless things. Psalm 101, I've got verse 3 on the screens. Let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 3. Excuse me, read verses 1 through 4. Psalm 101, beginning in verse 1. I will sing of steadfast love and justice. To you, O Lord, I will make music. I will ponder the way that is blameless. O when will you come to me? I will walk with integrity of heart within my house. I will not set before my eyes anything that is worthless. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. A perverse heart shall be far from me. I will know nothing of evil. The word worthless, this may seem really obvious, but I wanted to put it on the screens anyway, just to drive it home. Because I think when we see the word worthless in the Bible, we might kind of equate it just with evil. I won't say anything sinful, evil, unrighteous for my eyes. That's not what the word means. The word literally means something that's just without profit. That's why it's translated as worthless. It's without benefit. David, who wrote this poem, was saying, I'm not going to put something before my eyes unless it profits me. And he wasn't talking about wealth as far as the earth. He was speaking of praise to God. I'm not going to put something before my eyes that doesn't profit me drawing closer to what God would have me to be. Now, some people are probably watching this or hearing this and going, well, I guess we can never have any fun. Because isn't like a ball game or a sitcom or, checking Facebook, isn't that just worthless? Depends, doesn't it? Is there value sometimes in laughter? Yeah, absolutely. Is there value sometimes in just letting our mind rest and maybe, quote-unquote, mindlessly watching something? Well, as long as it's not something sinful, yeah, there can be value in that. Is there value sometimes in something like social media where we connect with someone else? If we're using it for the right reason, yeah. So worthless doesn't mean that I have to wake up in the morning and just start reading in Genesis 1:1 and before I fall asleep that night and finish the last verse of Revelation, and that's all that can ever be before my eyes. But it does mean I need to evaluate everything I place before me and ask, is this serving a purpose that really is of benefit to me, or am I just doing it? And I think a lot of times with social media, we're just doing it. It's not profiting us in the moment. Again, it's not that it has no profit. There's some good things there, and it's fine to check it every so often and see what's going on or catch up with someone or encourage someone. That's great. It's good to put things on there that might make someone laugh or whatever. That's fine. But if I'm just doing it to be doing it, is it really of a profit to me or a benefit to me? And that's what we have to be mindful of constantly. Psalm 119, verse 37, the other verse I have up there, we don't know who wrote Psalm 119. I think it was David. Some people think it was Ezra. Said, turn my eyes from looking at worthless things. And the verse ends by saying, and give me life in your ways. Well, there's a sermon in that verse, isn't there, Chris? If I want to have life in the ways of God, what's going to be put away from my eyes? Worthless things that don't benefit me. So, again, I'm not saying everything on social media is worthless. A lot of it probably is, but not everything is. But that's one of the dangers, is we sometimes just get caught up in stuff that has no real benefit to us, especially spiritual benefit, and we just find ourselves just constantly involved in it because it's just there. So the solution... Oh, there was another slide. I forgot I had that slide. The other picture I want us to show... Oh, yeah, there it is the picture of the thorny soil. Luke chapter 8, verse 14, as Jesus gave the parable of the sower, he talked about the thorny soil, and it's the one who was continually being distracted. I've been asked to, if Polishing the Pulpit happens this year, I've been asked to do 4 lessons on one day on the parable of the sower. Those people are in for boredom. But it's basically looking at each of the soils. And as I study the thorny soil, I've got to say, that's the scariest one to me. It is the absolute scariest one to me. Luke 8:14. And as for what fell among the thorns, they are those who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of life, and their fruit does not mature. It doesn't say they got involved in a whole bunch of sinful stuff. It says it just got choked out by the stuff of this world. They were just distracted all the time. And if that doesn't wake us up to the danger, when Jesus, he doesn't say they got involved on Facebook. Facebook didn't exist when Jesus said this. But they just got caught up in just the cares, the constant stuff of this world. And he says their fruit never matured. They never became what they could have been. And I'm not going to read the passage. You know it well. It's characterized by the rich young ruler, the one who had all those crops come in. All he could think about was himself. and he was distracted by that, and God told him that was going to cost him his soul. So here's where I wanted to go next. The solution is we need to know our one thing. I preached on this on a Sunday night 2 or 3 weeks ago, so I'm not going to preach that whole sermon again because you all memorized it. I know everything I said. But in Psalm 27 verse 4, I love the verse. Again, David wrote this poem. He didn't say, I want everything possible from God. That's not how the verse begins. He said, one thing have I asked for, and that I will seek after, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in His temple. That's the answer. What was David's one thing? I want to be with God. I want to be in awe of God. That's the one thing I want to do. Philippians chapter 3, Paul wrote about pressing on towards one thing. One thing I do. I press on to the prize, the upper call of God in Christ Jesus. What was Paul's one thing? I want to draw closer to God. Now, again, am I saying social media is horrible? No. It can serve a purpose. It can even encourage us to do some of these things if it's used in the right way. To do some of the positive things, I should say, if it's used in the right way. But if we just do it to just do it, and it just distracts us and keeps us from focusing on the most important things and keeps us from being in complete awe of our God, it is a problem. Because it's pulling for the attention of our heart. And our heart needs to be fully attended to loving God. So distraction can be a major, major problem. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. We'll go ahead and introduce this next subject. There's no way we're going to get through it because we don't have time. I want us to think about social media and our time. When I talk to people or people talk to me and they say, I'm thinking about getting off of social media, or I'm thinking about doing this or doing that, this is what they talk about probably more than anything else. It's either this or I'm tired of all the drama. It's one of those two things. It's almost never anything else. I've probably heard a few other things, but that's pretty much the two things that I'm either going to get off of it, or I'm going to take a break from it, or I'm going to limit myself or whatever, because either I'm tired of the drama or I realize how much time I was spending on Facebook or on Twitter or on Instagram or whatever, or all of them, or those and more, MeWe and Parler, and there's 18 million of them now. I'm spending all this time checking all this stuff. The average time consuming media online for the average teenager in America is 9 hours. Tweens, which according to the survey or the statistics I looked at, they defined as 9 to 12, is 6 hours a day. Now Leo's the math teacher, but even I know that's a quarter of every day. 6 out of 24 hours is spent online consuming some type of media. Now that includes, let's be fair, that includes YouTube videos. It includes some homes do their television through streaming. We do. We don't have cable. We have streaming TV, so it would technically include that because it's coming through our internet. It now, of course, in a lot of places includes schooling. They're consuming media for videos for school. So some of this is not bad in and of itself. But 9 hours a day. I mean, how many hours are they awake? Is not a ton more than that. 2 of those hours is specific to social media, at least. And by the way, the number is increasing. I've looked at older numbers and newer numbers. It used to be about an hour and 15 to 30 minutes. Now it's 2 hours, and they're saying the projections are going towards 3 in a heartbeat. Partially because of coronavirus shutdowns, kids being alone more, or at least having more access through being home and that sort of things. That's part of it. But if that door has been opened, it's not exactly going to shut when kids go back to school normally and that sort of thing. You add that up over the course of a normal lifetime, that means that young person is going to spend 5 years and 4 months of their life on social media. 5 years and 5 1/3 of their years of their life are going to be spent doing this. I heard someone say one time, and I thought it was kind of funny, but I also thought it was really, really telling. They said, when someone is asked to make a statue of the people of, at that time, the late 20th century, of course now early 21st century, they said this will be the pose. How wrong is that? I don't think it is. I think it's exactly right. Again, not all of it's bad. But 5 years of our life, and what they used for the average was the average living age in America, so about 78 to 80 years. But that's remarkable. We spend that much time there. And then you read Ephesians chapter 5, verses 15 and 16, where Paul said, "Look carefully how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil." Again, if you can't see that very well, it's Ephesians 5, 15 and 16. Some of you may know this, but in the Greek language of the New Testament, there's at least 2 different words for time. One has to do, of course, with just the turning of the clock, turning of the calendar, that sort of thing, that kind of time, just the passing of time. That's not the word that's used here. That's chronos or chronos. The word here is kairos, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, and it literally more has the idea of opportunity. The opportunity or the appointed time. That's the word that Paul chose here. And that's not a perfect definition, but gets kind of at the meaning of it. Making the best use, he's saying, not just of Tuesday, or not just the best use of Wednesday afternoon. What he's saying is, make the best use of every appointed opportunity that you have. And then you think about passages like, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, but especially those who are the household of faith, Galatians 6 and verse 10. And it really puts this passage into light. Are we really making the best use of every opportunity, every appointed time, if we're always caught up in what everybody else in the whole world is doing, people I'll never meet, and just checking in constantly and that sort of thing? I want to read to you a quote, and then our time will probably be done. This was actually said by Marcus Aurelius. I never thought in Bible class I quote Marcus Aurelius, but this is really, really good. He didn't have Facebook because he lived 1900 years ago. But he said, even if you are going to live 3,000 more years, or 10 times that, remember this: you cannot lose another life than the one you are living now, or live another than the one you are losing. The present is the same for everyone, and it should be clear that a brief instant is what is lost. For you cannot lose the past or the future. How can you lose what you don't possess? Now, for somebody who lived way before really much of any media, that statement, that quotation still hits home big time. And I love how he exaggerates. If you live 3,000 years or if you live 30,000 years, for one thing, you got Methuselah beat. But if you live 30,000 years, all you can lose in every moment of any one of those things is the present. You can't lose the past, you can't lose the future. All you've got's now. And if I'm spending all of it, or a whole bunch of it, just doing mindless, worthless, divided mind, that kind of stuff, am I really making the best use of each opportunity? Next week, Lord willing, we will continue thinking about the time factors. I don't believe he's going to tell us we have to shut down Facebook and never be on it again. No, we're going to talk about how we can be involved, but how we can be involved in ways that are responsible. And don't make it where it's just consuming our lives constantly. We've got about a minute left, but I want to stop there because that's a good stopping point in my notes. So we'll just finish there and wait for the children to join us. Thank you all this morning.